Episode 22 of the podcast. We're going to talk a little bit about grooming tables and grooming loops. And then in the second part, we're going to talk a little bit about writing an outline for behavior change. This is the Creating Great Grooming Dogs podcast. I'm Chrissy Newmeyer-Smith. I'm a certified professional groomer, a certified behavior consultant for canines, and a certified professional dog trainer. And this, my friends and colleagues, is the podcast where grooming and training meet. I had a discussion this week with another trainer. It was fascinating because it's somebody who comes from a zoo background, but who happens to be a dog owner. And some of the things that came up were, it was very obvious that there's a huge disconnect, that people don't understand what the grooming process is, which is part of why I do this. But it was very interesting because one of the things that came up is that the use of a grooming table. That maybe I'm making assumptions that all groomers use tables when they do not, and that somehow grooming table and being on the grooming loop was a little bit aversive. All right, so I didn't mean to giggle, but you know me, I'm giggly. But what came up about that was that I want trainers to know that grooming tables are an industry standard. So that's not my opinion about what normally goes on in a grooming setting. That is an industry standard. So while there are groomers who are cage-free or who do one at a time and don't use a grooming loop when a dog is on a table, or who, with a large dog, might work on the floor, they probably still have that dog on a loop, on some sort of a leash to keep the dog from running around the room right there. I don't see those things as aversive any more than I would see cross ties for horses or cages for zoo animals or crates, other ways that we keep animals from just walking away. So there are times where in training we're working toward being able to do that. So when I'm talking about the grooming setting, I'm trying to express to trainers what these dogs are going to need to live up to. Not necessarily that that's where we start, because I would really like to see trainers helping owners and dogs prep for this better so that they aren't coming into a grooming environment for the very first time, having zero experience with standing up and having somebody touch their foot, right? There are things that this dog will need to know how to do. And I do hold dogs to a higher standard than other types of animals because they live in our homes, right? So sure, there are dogs out there who live out, tied out in kennels and stuff, but they probably aren't going to grooming shops. So because this is a very groomer-centric podcast and veterinary-centric podcast, like the basic handling needs, I do hold dogs to a higher standard. They can handle it, right? Dog training is all about leash work and off-leash work. And I don't see the grooming table and the grooming loop as anything more than just an extension of that. So the purpose of the grooming table is a safety factor. And when I talk about the grooming industry, there are safety things that we all generally agree on as normal standards of care. If we didn't use a grooming loop, there is a risk that a dog could just jump off the table and hurt themselves. That happens, right? If a dog is on a grooming loop and is under the impression that it can walk away when it is done or when it gets stressed or move away from our hand, they can fall off the table and hurt themselves because they're on leash tied to the grooming loop. Right? So think about it as like the sudden bang and they're hanging from there, right? Dogs have died in grooming accidents. So I think that sometimes trainers are thinking in terms of, oh, well, that's just grooming and that's just haircuts and that's just, frivolous. And I understand why you might think that way. It is not frivolous. It is very important. One of the things that came up in this fascinating discussion, it was very thought-provoking, was the idea that, if it were a veterinary procedure, it would make more sense that, like, the kind of restraint that gets used and the way that groomers sometimes push an issue further without necessarily backtracking to lots of treats because treats can't always be used. So my take on that is that grooming is part of medical, right? We aren't veterinarians, but you know what? As a groomer, and I've been doing this for a long time, and my fellow groomers, we send dogs to the vet frequently. We catch the things that their owners might not have noticed. We catch lots of problems. So sometimes a dog comes in and they've got skin problems, or they've got an ear problem, or they've got, they've got something going on with a pad, with their foot. They've got a new mole that's oozing. They've got something going on in their mouth, because yep, groomers are in their mouth. That's how we trim that hair close to the edge of that wrinkle in their lip, their little flews. We've got our fingers in their mouth and we notice things. So sometimes dogs are coming to us sore. Sometimes they are coming to us with an issue. And if we send them to the vet, it doesn't mean that we necessarily skipped doing the full groom, right? I might choose to not clean ears because I suspect that there's something going on with the ear and I want the vet to be able to do a nice clean swab. Or I may, have, the rest of the grooming just go normal. Or I might send that dog directly to a vet, right? But it is it's an extension of medical care. And while I would love for owners to have groomers do their dog, because I think that it's a great service for most owners, they don't need to have a groomer do it. There's nothing saying that you can't just, buy a couple of trimmers at Walmart and go ahead and trim up your dog. That's great if you want to do that. But we provide a luxury service for a pet, right? So I know we don't like to think of it this way, but our pets are a luxury item. Nobody says you have to have a dog. There's, they aren't a farm animal anymore. For most of us, they are, little money sucks. At least mine are, like the amount of money I spend on my dogs, right? But if we are teaching owners what we need as an industry, then we can all work together to help these dogs be better for grooming, for vet procedures, for their own owners. So when I talk about grooming tables and being on a grooming loop, and that this is like the gold standard for the grooming industry, it's because it is absolutely such a normal part of the average grooming setup. So even though I'm a house call groomer, I bring in a grooming table with a grooming loop. I bring in a dryer. I have a clipper vac. I've got all the equipment. I bring a shop into my customers' homes. So I want you to be thinking, if you're a trainer, like, oh, this is a normal part of the average dog's expected repertoire, right? And that we should be spending time working on it. We should be spending time on how to be good for some of this stuff, because owners, if the groomer can't do it, I'm going to tell you, if the groomer can't do it, the owner can't do it either. It's very rare owner that has better success than the groomer did. Very rare. I mean, they might be able to if they do one toenail a day for the rest of their dog's life, And I'm not saying that's not where you start. In fact, I have a customer I was talking to Saturday that was one of the things we talked about, is that they're working on one nail every single day, and I'm so proud of them, right? But they also know that's not for the lifetime, right? They're also very aware that that's how we get to the bigger thing that we want. And so talking to other trainers, I want you to be thinking about learning more about the expectations of what groomers need dogs to know. Because I'll tell you what, I want groomers and trainers working together. Groomers, I want you to know that there are trainers out there who have a different take on behavior change. So sometimes groomers are thinking, oh, I understand behavior. I understand, I get what this dog is doing. But in the realm of grooming, we aren't really good at knowing how to change a behavior. We learned how to do haircuts despite the behavior, right? Maybe squelch some of that behavior, but not actually teach a new one. All right. So trainers, if you're approaching groomers, don't tell them you're going to teach them the behavior. They're going to laugh you out of the room. I mean, it will give them a great chuckle. They will think it's hilarious. They'll joke about it for years because I've been there. Trainer trying to tell me that even my dog could be good. I was like, what are you talking about? You know, like, don't tell them you're going to teach them about behavior, but tell them like, hey, we can work together to teach dogs to be good for what you need them to do, right? Like to make behavior change, because that's what trainers study. I mean, that's if you're on the podcast, we're all kind of studying it, right? And by the way, you guys are very rare unicorns. Rare unicorns, and I want a whole stable of unicorns. We're going to get this, right? I want more unicorns. But anybody who's interested in grooming and in training is already working hard, right? So groomers, I want you to be thinking trainers usually have access to one dog with its owner, not necessarily on their own. They aren't necessarily working with that dog just by themselves, right? And they usually aren't working in an environment that's loud. So there are things that they don't understand about our process. So I want groomers to kind of approach trainers and say, hey, I need a dog to hold still, to do some things for me. And they're pretty basic and pretty simple, but that doesn't mean that they aren't going to take time to learn, right? So in the next part, we're going to talk a little bit about behavior change. If you're enjoying my podcast, please remember to subscribe so that you don't miss any episodes. As part of this discussion I had with this trainer this week, I'm referring right now to Dr. Susan Friedman's Behavior Toolkit, which is a PDF. And you know what? If you are on the Facebook group for Creating Great Grooming Dogs, I can go ahead and put it up there. But this is part 1, and she calls it Tool Assembly. So I'm going to run through a little bit about grooming behaviors based on her format. So she talks about define the behavior. So in the past in this podcast, we've talked about observing what we do want, right? Observing what the dog is doing, what our learner is doing, and thinking about what we actually see. We're going to get rid of any of the baggage, and we're going to look at what we see happening. So what does the behavior look like? Can you describe it? So I'm going to describe 4 behaviors, just really quick, that I think really apply to the grooming industry. And to the veterinary industry. But those 4 behaviors, 1 would be to be touched all over with noisy objects. I decided to make it like just, touched all over is one thing, but to be touched all over with noisy objects, because those are clippers and dryers and water sprayers. Generally, things that we use are noisy. So that's the first behavior. 2, to be repositioned. Like not only are you getting touched with stuff, you're being repositioned. The third one, being picked up or held close to be picked up. Because even if a dog is large, we don't necessarily want them jumping up into and out of tubs, or even with tables that are super low. A lot of dogs will need to be boosted up a little bit, right? Even if you get our front pads, the front feet on the table, and we boost their bum for them. And then the 4th behavior is to be still in a position. That's part of being repositioned and touched all over, but also to be still in a position. So that's how I'm going to define part 1 of the tool assembly. Part 1, define the behavior, right? Part 2 is to split that target behavior into smaller steps to shape them. And that's really where at-home stuff comes in. So touching at home and touching in a variety of positions, working on calm and still, holding a dog close for picking them up. Those are things that owners can be doing at home and doing them in an environment the dog is really comfortable in a place that's quiet. So there are less distractions there, which is part of making it a smaller step. Okay, so be thinking about, oh, wait, I can work on just one thing. And maybe that's, when you're toweling your dog off when they come in from the rain. So having them stand up while you touch them with a towel, which isn't a noisy object, but it's an object. So those are splitting it into smaller steps so that we don't have to introduce it all at once in a grooming setting. So the third one, create a supportive environment before the behavior occurs. And that's kind of when we're talking about like our grooming room and our grooming environment and what a dog needs to lower all of those stress levels, right? So, what prevents the behavior for some dogs, right? What prevents them from being able to just go with those four behaviors, being touched all over with noisy objects, repositioned, picked up, or be still in a position. And one of the things that sometimes prevents that is being overwhelmed by noises, being around new people, and the proximity to other animals. So what can we change? If we have a dog who's having trouble with it, or a dog who is newly introduced to this, because it's not always about trying to fix a behavior that's already a problem, it's about building a new behavior for many of our pups who are new to grooming, right? So one of the things that we can do to our environment is to pick a quieter time of day, to keep our learner, the dog on our table, out to a point where they can't view other dogs. As a groomer, we always need to be able to view the other dogs, right? That's part of supervising the animals in our care. But even if it's a matter of just kind of turning a dog so that their back is to the other dogs in the room, minimize some of the distraction level for the dog that needs some extra help. What kind of cues can we use to signal the learner to do the behavior? That's a good one, right? So trainers I know are all about that, but groomers might not be thinking about like what kind of cues do we give a dog when we want them to do the behavior of be groomed, right? We broke it into four things, but really it's the behavior of being groomed, right? I would say one of those things that can be a signal that the behavior is going to begin for a dog is being on leash in a grooming area. Right? If they're on leash in a grooming area, that's a little bit of a, oh, okay, this isn't playtime. We need to focus. Something new is going to happen. Being on a grooming table and being in a bathtub. Those are also places where the behaviors are going to need to happen. So in a bathtub, and I know sometimes trainers don't realize this, but in a bathtub, the dog is still on a leash. Right? The grooming loop is still attached. We can't let a dog jump out of the bathtub. In fact, I got my back hurt by a dog who, when I released him to pick him up, torqued my back because he just decided he was going to barrel out of there. And I didn't realize that his owners thought it was, oh, we always let him jump out on his own. Like, no, that is not safe. We want dogs to be able to allow us to do the things we need to do, right? So the signal for the behavior can be being in a bathtub, being on a grooming table, or being on leash in the grooming area. And what prompts the target behavior, right? What is it that's going to help this dog realize like, oh, this is it. This is what I need to do. And I'm going to add in here verbal instructions, right? When we ask a dog to be still, hey, still, he's a good boy, right? I mean, we say these things to our dogs. Naming body parts and equipment is something that I do a lot of, and I encourage you to also, because dogs start getting a feel for like, okay, come on, this foot, pick it up. There you go. Good job. Nail trimmers, line it up, snip. Or here comes the dryer, loud noise, right? And getting them used to some of these verbal prompts to tell them that something is going to be happening in their environment, near them, to them, all right? And then also, another prompt for the behavior we're asking for is physical assistance, repositioning, yielding to touch, right? That we're going to be having our hands on them and repositioning legs and asking them to stand or letting them sit. Most grooming is standing. Not all of it. There are plenty of times I'll let a dog sit, but most of it is going to be standing, right? So that's part of how we can create the environment that we want the animal to be in, right? So that we can, like I said, reduce some of the overwhelming noises and people and quieter times of day and all of those other things are part of us making the area easier to learn in. Now, part 4 of her tool assembly kit, right? Identify long-term reinforcers. So, for example, the naturally occurring benefits of this behavior for the learner. I am going to say the natural, and I'm not really sure there's a natural outcome for this behavior, something that the animal is going to think is a benefit. But the outcome is a clean and healthier dog. and the behavior is maintained as physical bonding between groomer and learner, or groomer and dog. And because it's a dog-centric podcast, I'm not mentioning cats and horses, but the idea is still there. I do find, and this is anecdotal, that many dogs feel good after grooming. I know that's getting anthropomorphic, attributing feelings that I cannot define. However, after a grooming, many dogs, if they were stressed out, you would expect them to go off and hide. But they prance around the house and goof off and are super silly and active. And to me, that is an animal that not only is relieved that the grooming is over, but also feels good in their own skin. And I'll give you another example as far as like the benefits to the behavior is that I've known plenty of animals that once they figured out brushing, they enjoy brushing. Like brushing feels good. I had a kitty that I adopted when she was 9 years old, and I don't think she had ever seen a brush. When she figured out what brushing was, if a brush was on the floor, she was rubbing it. If I was brushing the dog, she was rubbing the dog, waiting for her turn to be brushed. And so that's one example of an animal that thinks like, oh, but grooming feels good. So when we get them past the idea that some of it might be scary or some of it might be stressful, then we can get them into this idea that like, don't you feel good when it's done? Because you know what? In my experience, many dogs are super happy when it's done. So the next one she talks about in her toolkit is identifying short-term jumpstart type reinforcers for teaching the behavior, right? That they aren't going to be permanent. It's not going to be something you have to do forever. But what kind of things can we do to teach the behavior? You know, what kind of reinforcers can we use? And reinforcers, again, are things that encourage the behavior. Something that we added that increases the likelihood of the behavior occurring again. Different than just giving a cookie, because sometimes a cookie is just a cookie and it has no bearing on the behavior at all, or has a bearing that you didn't expect. But the reinforcers for this, for grooming, I would say the kind of reinforcers we would use, of course, depend on our learner. But some of the things that I would put highest are things like petting and praise, maybe toys, before I would try food. Only because, as we've discussed before, a grooming setting isn't necessarily a great place for adding food. It can throw a wrench into the whole day because other dogs in the room can act really weird around food. There are a lot of food aggressive dogs out there in the general animal population. And I don't want anyone getting hurt because, you know, a different dog in the room suddenly starts getting really wound up because he smells peanut butter all day, right? But petting and praise and breaks, taking breaks from what we're doing, like, hey, cool, now let's play a little bit, and a little bit of toy, and then back to a crate, and, you know, here you can be in there with a toy. Those are ways that we can use some reinforcers, some rewards, some ways of giving them something that tells them, oh, I earn something with the behavior I just showed, and maybe I'll show that behavior again to earn some more stuff. So just a very basic breakdown, one of the various ways that trainers would break down behaviors. And again, that's Dr. Susan Friesman's behavior toolkit, the part 1, just the tool assembly. And I can put that on the Creating Great Grooming Dogs Facebook page as a link. But it's a way for us to look at the things that we want and figure out how we can build them, and to be thinking about not only if there's a dog who already has a problem, but the dogs that haven't even been born yet, right? The puppy that's getting born tomorrow. These are the kind of things that we can prepare them for and plan on using to help create a behavior that we want and create a great grooming dog. So hopefully that helps anybody. I hope so. I have fun with this, but I'd love to hear some more feedback from you guys. And have a great week and stay curious. If you'd like to talk to me, you can find me through my grooming and training business, happycrittersdogtraining.com, my email, chrissy@happycritters.net, and through the Creating Great Grooming Dogs Facebook page. And we have these awesome devices in our pockets that allow us to do live video with each other. I can help you with the dog on your table. We can set up live lessons, and you may be surprised at how much we can get accomplished together via video. I'm also happy to come to you if you're near my area in southern New Hampshire.